What type of organism is this? Although it looks a lot like a mouse, it's actually a honey possum. The honey possum, or Tarsippes rostratus, is one of the smallest marsupials in existence. Small, rare, and eating almost its own body weight in food each day, the honey possum is found in a small area in the southwest of Western Australia. Although honey possums consume a huge amount of food each day, it's got to be the right type of food. And these little guys are the only non-flying mammals to feed exclusively on flowers. The average mass of a honey possum is about 9 to 10 grams. Research into the honey possum has been carried out at the University of Western Australia for the last 20 years. One of the scientists involved in the research is Professor Don Bradshaw, who has been investigating the honey possum's diet, habitat, and reproductive patterns.
Well, I'm surprised to discover that it's 20 years now since I first started to work on the honey possum, and really quite by accident. I never had any intention of studying this particular little animal, because most of my work up until then had been on desert animals, snakes, lizards, and of course some of the desert marsupials, the desert wallabies. And what happened was we bought a block of land down near Augusta on the other side of the river, and to get to the block one had to go through Scott National Park. And in driving through the park, which was very interesting country, I wondered what animals were living there. So I managed to get a permit to trap on the national park, and we were the first to discover that honey possums actually live there. Of all of the marsupials, the honey possum is probably the most unusual. In fact, almost anything about it is different from any other marsupial we know. Even the name has been a source of controversy. It was first described in 1842 and called Tarsippes spenceri, and Spencer was the maiden name of the governor's wife. But in fact, the French were active, and two Frenchmen, Gervais and Verreau, who were out in Australia at the time. Verreau was a taxidermist collecting Australian marsupials that he could stuff and then sell back in Paris. They actually described it as Tarsippes rostratus 2 weeks before the English described it. So we now have to call it Tarsippes rostratus instead of spenceri. It's a tiny marsupial. It only weighs about 8 or 9 grams. It seems to have things the wrong way around. The female is bigger than the male. The female is also extremely aggressive, which seems to fly in the face of nature, and the females beat up the males whenever they get the chance. Males, on the other hand, get their own back in another way. They have the largest testes of any mammal in the world relative to body size. So the weight of their testes is 5% of their body weight. If you like to calculate that out for a human being, you'll be intensely surprised. The other thing about them is that they seem to be not related to any other marsupial. There have been many studies done trying to work out what we call their phylogeny, where they come from and who are their closest relatives. Although we call them possums, they're not possums at all. They're not related to the other possums in any way. In fact, their closest relative is another little marsupial living in South America. And this gives you a clue about their origins. They go right back to the time when Australia was part of that large southern continent called Gondwana, when Australia, of course, was joined to Antarctica, and this area was essentially a tropical forest. So we know that their origins go back to about 50 or 60 million years of age, and that's reflected again in their taxonomy. They are classified in a separate family, all of their own, and they're the only species in that family. Scott National Park is a very unusual area. Most of it is fairly low-lying and damp in winter, and really that's the only reason that it's still there, because had it been good farming country, it would have been cleared long ago. This is one of the tragedies in a way. Very often the only national parks we have left are those which have not been taken up by farmers because of the poor soils. Despite the very poor quality of the soil, there is a very rich abundance of particularly plants, and Scott National Park is one of the areas of our southwest biodiversity hotspot where we have this tremendous abundance of different species of plants which have evolved over the 60 million years of time. What we've found over our 20-year study is that things haven't remained constant, things are changing. Dieback is one of the big problems in the national park, and many of the banksia trees are dying. Every year we go down there, we see more and more banksia trees that have died, which is a major reason for concern. Fire is also a problem. Our study area has been burnt twice, deliberately, by CALM or DEC as it is now, and they burnt it as a fire break against a wildfire. So even national parks are not immune to these sorts of things happening. So in 2 instances our population of honey possums has been eliminated by fire. Fortunately we were able to stop the fire before it crossed the Scott River Road, and the honey possums were able to reinvade from unburnt areas and reinvade the burnt area. But it takes a long time for the population to build up. We're 7 years now post the second fire, and the population density in the burnt area is still only half that in the unburnt area. We estimate anywhere between 15 and 25 years before the population will get back to what it was.